boy, looks like it's about to go down now. Hello, how's it going everyone? We have another great chapter of One Piece this week. But before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Now, without further ado, let's get right into it. First, of course, we have the cover story, where we see that Who's Who has a sword aimed at a tied up Pepe's throat, with Ulti being forced to watch on. I am guessing this is where Yamato swoops in for the save, or maybe page 1 just dies right here, who knows. But I guess we will just have to wait and see what happens in the next installment. Now let's move on to the main chapter. We start off this week's chapter with Nami and Rodo on their way back to the feast, while Nami complains about their failed trip to the castle, since they didn't get their hands on any treasure, and she personally doesn't really care one way or the other about Loki. And while she is complaining, Rodo is trying to get her to lower her voice, since the giant guards from the castle are with them and he doesn't want them knowing about their objectives in going to the castle. After that, we cut over to the treasure tree group, where Ripley is explaining to Franky how the civilization on Elbaf operates, telling him that all the villages on Elbaf are located on the branches of the treasure tree, and as a result, each one of the branches has a long and rich history of its own. Franky then points out a destroyed branch and asks her about the story behind it. Ripley explains that a village called Haugen used to be located on that branch, but after the village got hit by lightning one day and went up in flames, and the branch had gotten too old and dry, they decided to just cut it off in order to prevent the rest of the villages from also getting caught up in the fire. Ripley then says that Elbaf's greatest weakness are fire and lightning. When I was first reading the chapter, I thought that maybe this was alluding to either Sabo or Enel, or maybe even both of them showing up on Elbaf. But after seeing how this chapter ended, I am guessing that this might be a hint towards Loki's powers, since it was mentioned in an earlier chapter that Loki was burning villages in the past. And I doubt it's a coincidence that Ripley mentions Elbaf's greatest weakness in the same chapter where Loki's chains were partially removed. And it would also explain why the giants on Elbaf are so scared of Loki getting out, since he could theoretically destroy the entirety of Elbaf as well as the treasure tree Adam. Next we cut over to the feast, where we see that Nami has returned and is greeted by a very drunk Usopp, who asks her where she went and also where Luffy and Zoro went off to. Nami tells him that they are probably just exploring. After that, Usopp brings Nami and introduces her to Chief Jarul, who praises her beauty, to which Usopp asks Jarul if Nami is his type. So Jarul tells him that he is into older women, to which Usopp retorts that Jarul is the oldest guy in the world, so there's no way he will ever find a woman older than him. I don't know about that though, since many people think Imu is a woman, and if Imu has been alive since the world century, as people also speculate might be the case, then is this setting up Jarul as a traitor to Elbaf so he can get with Imu? Okay, let me chill, that's too much, I'm going too far there. Moving on, Usopp also slaps the sword stuck in Yarul's head, and Jarul screams out in pain. Dory then grabs Usopp and tells him to keep his hands off the elder's sword. Usopp just tells him to shut up and asks everyone if there is a hero around that wants to pull out Excalibur from Yarul's head. Brogy then rightly points out that he will bleed out if they do that. Brook then hilariously points out Usopp's drunkenness, while he himself has his head stuck where his other head should be. Nami then remarks that it can't be helped that Usopp is enjoying himself so much, since he has always dreamed of making it to Elbaf one day, and Jinbei agrees with her. After that, we cut over to Sanji realizing that Gerd is missing. And after that, we cut over to Gerd assessing the condition of the castle guards, and after noticing their severe injuries, she interrogates Rodo about what's going on. So Rodo tries to lie to her that he just went to the castle to get some inspiration for his own block castle, and happened to find the door sliced up and the guards beaten up. Gerd immediately notices that something is up, since Rodo is sweating bullets. Rodo is of course enjoying this attention from Gerd. Gerd then tries to wake up the guards and also tell Chief Jarul about the situation, but Rodo stops her from doing both, so she gets even more suspicious. Rodo then has an internal monologue about not wanting to be labeled as an accomplice in Luffy and the gang releasing Loki, and about about how he hopes that Loki will just leave the country after he is released, since Rodo doesn't care about whatever Loki does overseas. He then starts wondering about Shamrock, but he gets cut off by Gerd, who has decided to just beat the truth out of him, which he is of course enjoying. After that, we have the final part of the chapter, where we cut over to the underworld, where Luffy and Zoro have just reached the place where Loki is tied up, and are surprised to find him beaten up and bloodied. Luffy is worried about Loki, meanwhile Zoro is stunned by his size. Pause. Luffy then tries to free Loki, while Zoro tells him to wait. But Luffy loses all his strength when he tries to climb the chains, since they are made of sea stone. After which, Zoro and Luffy get into an argument over whether or not they should free Loki. Luffy wants to help him, but Zoro rightly points out that they don't owe him anything. And also the fact that even though Zoro hasn't met him personally, they still shouldn't take his reputation lightly, since he is as big as Oz, and if they let him run loose, there's no telling what could happen, even to a country like Elbaf. Zoro then kicks Loki in order to confirm that he isn't faking his injuries. Loki briefly regains consciousness before losing it again, but based on what happens later, I am guessing him falling back unconscious was an act. At this point, Zoro does his best Ivan Drago impression, with Luffy pointing out how messed up what Zoro is saying is. After confirming that Loki isn't faking his injuries, Zoro decides to go along with unlocking Loki, although he suggests that they should leave some of the sea stone around his legs just in case, and decide what to do next after talking things out with Loki. Luffy then suggests that they should call Chopper, but Zoro points out that they are too far away from the library, and they should just look for a doctor back at the feast instead. Although he points out that if the giants find out they freed Loki, then they will probably be banished from the country. Luffy says that that can't be helped, and that they have no choice but to help Loki. Luffy also suggests that they should stock up on meat as well. Zoro points out that there is plenty of meat right next to them, pointing to Loki's buddies. Luffy tells him not to even joke about it, since they are his friends, and anybody that becomes his friend is off the menu. After saying that, Luffy sets off to find a doctor, but he doesn't even get a few steps into it before he spots something falling from the sky towards him. We see that it's actually Hirudin and the new giant warrior pirates, along with Sanji, who are falling, because Hirudin thought that they could use the last bit of buoyancy of the island clouds to get to the underworld safely, even though Rodo told him that the island clouds can't sustain themselves over the underworld. They all accept their fate, with Hirudin apologizing for making the wrong call, but then Luffy just uses his gum balloon to save them. Although hilariously, he bounces the ship off and they get hurt anyway. Well, except for Gerd, who luckily falls out of the ship beforehand. They still thank Luffy, since even though they got hurt, they would have probably died without his help. They then implore Luffy and Zoro to stop their attempt to free Loki, once again reiterating how dangerous he is, that he is a fiend that betrays others without a second thought. But unfortunately, as it turns out, they are too late, and Zoro has already partially removed the chains around Loki. After which, Loki finally stands up, and we see just how big he actually is. Again, pause. Luffy is surprised that he got up, since he thought that Loki was out cold. Loki then grabs his sword, with Hirudin demanding him to stop and put down his sword. Here we find out that apparently Loki's sword is called Ragnir, potentially as a combination of Ragnarok and Mjolnir. And with that, the chapter ends. All in all, this was a great chapter of One Piece, where we saw Usopp finally getting to enjoy his dream, well, at least for a little bit, since based on what happens at the end of the chapter, he probably won't be enjoying this dream for much longer. We also potentially got some hints to what Loki might be capable of, with Ripley pointing out that the biggest weakness of Elbaf are fire and lightning. I suppose this could also mean that bigmom could show up on Elbaf after all, but I guess we will have to wait and see. We also found out Jarul's preference in women, which could potentially be a hint that he is a traitor to Elbaf. This is One Piece after all. You never know, it could happen. And finally, we got to see Loki released from his chains, at least partially, and I can't wait to see what he is capable of with his sword, since Hirudin seemed to be very concerned about him picking it up. Although that does beg the question of why they left the sword so close to him in the first place. But then again, I guess it could be the case that Loki is the only one on Elbaf who can pick it up, since it does seem to be named after Mjolnir after all. I really can't wait to find out what happens in the next chapter. So I guess I will see you when that comes out. Once again, make sure to like and subscribe. Bye bye.